The British Prime Minister flees his own scandals in Great Britain to a crisis area. In Ukraine, Boris Johnson warns Russia of the high cost of war. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has pledged support to Ukraine during a visit to Kiev and has strongly warned Russia against an attack on the neighboring country. The Ukrainian army will put up violent and bloody resistance, Johnson said at a press conference with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. This message must be clear to the Russian public and Russian mothers, Johnson said. He very much hopes that the head of the Kremlin, Vladimir Putin, will withdraw his military from the Ukrainian border and focus on diplomacy. Zelensky agreed with the Prime Minister. Ukrainians will defend themselves to the last, said the president. The Russians had to understand that a war would end in tragedy. The country, the people, and the army had changed. Now there will be no simple occupation of any city or region, emphasized the president. Therefore, I say openly that there will be no war between Ukraine and Russia. It will be a large-scale war in Europe. Johnson said a Russian invasion would spell political, humanitarian, and military disaster. He threatened that Britain and its allies had prepared tough sanctions against Russia. These would come into force as soon as the first Russian TOW entered Ukrainian territory and would trigger an automatism. Two reporters from the popular private TV station Ariana have disappeared in Afghanistan. Varis Hazrat and Aslam Hijab have been missing since Monday evening, an Ariana employee told the German press agency on Tuesday. According to security camera footage, armed men in uniform driving government cars picked them up from right outside the TV station gate. The employee assumed that the armed men were forces of the ruling militant Islamist Taliban. Hazrat's brother said Tuesday that Hazrat is being held by Taliban intelligence. The spokesman for the GDI Secret Service contradicted this. The men were not arrested by the GDI, they told the DPA. Hazrat is a producer and host of political programs, Hijab business reporter. The incident came a day after a program broadcast by Ariana in which a guest in a live debate harshly criticized the Taliban. The human rights organization Amnesty International criticized the incident in a statement on Twitter on Tuesday. The arbitrary arrest of the two journalists cannot be justified. Such attacks on media freedom are a serious threat to the right to freedom of expression. They called on the Taliban to unconditionally and immediately release the reporters. Journalists have been intimidated or detained since Taliban took power in Afghanistan in August. Some reported being beaten or tortured after their release. Dozens of media workers have left the country. Even before the talks between the foreign ministers, the tone had become sharper. After the phone call, it became clear again, tensions between the US and Russia are threatening to escalate. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken called on Russia to immediately withdraw troops deployed on the border with Ukraine. Blinken insisted on an immediate Russian de-escalation and the withdrawal of soldiers and equipment from the borders with Ukraine, said US State Department spokesman Ned Price on Tuesday after the phone call. A Russian invasion of the neighboring country would have rapid and serious consequences, Blinken warned. In the crisis, Russia must continue to follow a diplomatic path. Blinken reiterated US support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity and the right of every country to decide its own foreign policy and alliances. The latter is a reference to Ukraine's ambition to join NATO, which Russia flatly opposes. At the same time, Blinken emphasized the willingness of the US government to hold further consultations with Russia on security issues. Shortly before the phone call, Moscow had sharpened its tone again towards the West. Despite warnings of sanctions from the United States, Moscow will not back down, the Russian embassy in Washington said on Tuesday. It was Washington, not Moscow, that is stoking tensions. Kremlin chief Vladimir Putin received Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban in Moscow on Tuesday. The US State Department says it received a letter from Moscow on the eve of the call, in which the Russian government reiterated its position on the Ukraine crisis. However, as the Kremlin has stressed, this is not an official response to Washington's recent proposals to settle the conflict. Last week, the United States and NATO responded in writing to Russian demands for security guarantees. In the letters, Washington and NATO rejected a NATO waiver demanded by Putin for further eastward expansion and the withdrawal of US weapons from states in the former Soviet sphere of influence. However, Blinken emphasized that the US had shown the Russian a serious diplomatic path to ending the crisis. In Moscow, meanwhile, as I said, Putin received the Hungarian Prime Minister Orban. At the start of the meeting, Orban said his visit to the Russian capital was part of a peace mission. In the EU, nobody wants war, he says. We are ready for rational agreement. The Hungarian opposition sharply criticized Orban's visit to Moscow. The head of government is indirectly encouraging the Russian president to further escalate the Ukraine crisis, the opposition parties denounced in a joint statement. Right-wing populist Orban, whose country is both a NATO and EU member, has much closer ties to Moscow than many of its Western partners. In the afternoon, Putin and Orban wanted to hold a joint press conference, and they did, and I'll come to that in another video. Latvia wants to prevent people from Belarus from crossing the border illegally. That's why the country declared a state of emergency last summer. This has now been extended. Latvia has extended the state of emergency on the border with neighboring Belarus until May 10th. The government in Riga decided on Tuesday to continue the state of emergency imposed in 4 regions in the southeast and south of the Baltic EU country for 3 more months. The border guard should remain authorized to send back migrants who have entered Belarus illegally. As we see that the pressure on our border does not ease and the hybrid operation organized by the Lukashenko regime continues, we have no choice but to extend the state of emergency, Interior Minister Maria Golubeva said. For months, migrants have been trying to get from Belarus to Poland or the Baltic states via the EU's external borders. The EU accuses the Belarusian ruler Alexander Lukashenko of having flown people from crisis areas such as Iraq or Afghanistan to Minsk in order to then smuggle them into the EU. Latvia has responded by increasing border protection and building a border fence. The government in Riga also declared a state of emergency on August 11, which was originally intended to last for 3 months and has already been extended once. Since then, according to the Interior Ministry, almost 5,500 people have been prevented from illegally crossing the border into from Belarus. There has been an upward trend since mid-December. According to the ministry, the reason for the increase in attempts to convert is a change in tactics. According to this, migrants recently tried to get to Latvia repeatedly in small groups of 3 or up to 12 people and at different places on the border. And I'll see you in my next video. Bis gleich.